Franchising is the most misunderstood and most overlooked form of entrepreneurship. We're here to educate you and help you find the entrepreneur within. Franchising is not all about the French fries.
We find that individuals who are exploring business ownership tend to have a lot of misperceptions and misunderstandings about the franchise industry. So what we want to do is help prospective business owners make confident and educated decisions before moving forward or not moving forward with a business. Welcome to Unpredicted Entrepreneur.
Hello, and welcome to episode 79 of Unpredicted Entrepreneur. My name is Sarah Wasco, and I'm joined by my colleague, Roxanne Rapsky, and we created this podcast to bring you information about franchising and other topics related to business ownership. And today, we are thrilled to welcome our guest, Mike and Andrea Sims. They are co-owners of The Exercise Coach in Southlake, Colleyville, and Keller. So welcome to Unpredicted Entrepreneur, Mike and Andrea.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. So we were reflecting on our time working together, and we actually met back in 2017. It was in the fall. They reminded me that it was that long ago. And Andrea had a small business and was familiar with SCORE, which is an organization that is part of the Small Business Administration that is available for business owners or prospective business owners to help them grow or get started. And SCORE puts on a variety of workshops, and I was presenting about franchising that fall, and Andrea encouraged Mike to attend. Mike had exited corporate America, was trying to figure out next step, and so our work together just kind of evolved from there. And so, Mike, you can elaborate a little bit more on kind of your thought process in attending that. I know you said you were burned out on corporate, trying to figure out what was next.
Yeah, we tried to, I was pretty much done with working in the corporate space, not old enough to retire, and Andrea and I began to think a little bit about owning a small business without any concept of what that might entail. So, as you mentioned, Andrea, through her business, was aware of SCORE, received an email that you were hosting a SCORE workshop in Fort Worth, encouraged me to attend. I had nothing to do. So I attended it and had no idea what we're getting into. We're just beginning to kick the tires on what is owning a small business. So it was during that workshop, then got a sort of introduction into the notion of franchising, and we hadn't really thought about franchises at all. We kind of thought franchises from a very stereotypical way, all the very well-known ones. And I think at that workshop gained a little bit better appreciation for all the other businesses out there that are actually franchises, and we had no idea. So that was a bit intriguing. I think we exchanged business cards and took the next step, which was to begin working with you to better identify which path to take in terms of owning a small business.
Yeah.
So we went through the assessment process that you guys sponsor. Began to get introduced to a couple different franchise concepts, kicked the tires on, about a half a dozen of them, pretty extensively, pretty in-depth review about 6 different franchise concepts. That took us all the way into, somewhere around March of 2018, mm-hmm. I think it was, March or April. And we're getting a tad frustrated because at this point we're about 5-6 months deep into the process of looking at these different franchise concepts, which were very different from each other. And through that whole process of evaluation and reading FDDs and interviewing the corporate teams for different franchise concepts, I began to get a much better appreciation for the difference between franchises, and that becomes important. So in the process of doing that, though, as frustrating it was, it began to sort of crystallize our thoughts in terms of what would make the most sense for us. And so I think what happened was you guys attended a franchise expo, I think, and I remember clearly we're having our, whatever it is, our bi-weekly or bi-monthly probably, catch-up call. And you mentioned that you had a relatively new addition to the Franet portfolio, and it was a concept called the exercise coach.
Yeah, and I'll stop you there just to kind of elaborate, because you're right. I remember you were very you were very detail oriented and doing your due diligence, and we did speak every other week. A lot of times I talk every week, but you guys wanted to take your time, and every other week was good, but we just were not finding the right thing, right? And I always tell clients, sometimes we hit the nail on the head with the first handful, and sometimes it takes a little longer. Clients are learning about themselves. As you mentioned, you didn't know anything about franchising coming into the process. Most people don't. So it really is, you're learning about the franchisors, you're learning about yourself, we're learning together. But I specifically remember we have a conference twice a year, and I specifically remember we sit down with each franchise brand that attends, and they give us updates and share about their brand. I remember sitting with Jesse Hudson at Exercise Coach, and he was explaining it to me, and I told him, I may have a client for you, because it had been a while, and it was just somehow that seemed to resonate. So I came home, and when we got on our call, I was like, hey guys, I might have something. So then I remember, Andrea, you shared like immediately your first thought was
I knew it was a complete fit. Mike never misses a day of exercise. He's avid about fitness. He loves coaching people. He's coached baseball, youth baseball for years. And I just knew that was a really good area for him. When I learned about the 20-minute part, I was all over that.
So let's, elaborate on, the 20-minute and just kind of the business as a whole, so people can understand what the exercise coach is.
Wait, really quick before we get into that, I want to go back to you getting frustrated and doing all that work. That's the work that's required, though, to find a business. I think a lot of people think it's going to be a lot easier than that. That even when we present franchises, they want to go home and get online and just look at the websites and decide whether or not that's a good fit for them. That's you can't do that. You've got to do the work, because it's the culture of these franchises. It's how they run them. And it's just, as you learn, they're all so different. So that is the work that's required to make a good decision.
Yeah, I think it's as frustrating as it was an enlightening process for us. And so the more of these potential franchises that we reviewed, analyzed, interviewed, then you gain sort of finer points of distinction between what differentiates the different franchise concepts. And eventually it sort of begins to point you in the direction you need to head. And you sort of gain clarity through the process. And so, and to your point, Roxanne, you begin to, for us at least, as we're interviewing different franchise concepts, you become more attuned to things like the corporate culture. What's a corporate's long-term objective? Certainly, you get into the things, the basics of, the economics of decision and demographics and all that type of stuff. The support that the corporate team provides for the franchise owners. All these different elements come into play. And for us, at least, it wasn't until we had the opportunity to talk to multiple different franchise concepts before you begin to say, well, they don't really do that, or they're not going to handle that, or we become responsible for this. And that's not something we want to be responsible for necessarily. And so, it was a helpful process. So fast forward to the exercise coach, and so new addition to Sarah's portfolio. And Andrea explained why she thought it made sense instantly for us. I had a couple of challenges I had to get over myself with it. One is partly due to the fact I do, part of my DNA is to exercise a lot. And so on a daily basis for as long as I can remember. So I had my own sort of ingrained beliefs without to be honest with you, a lot of research as to what I thought constituted exercise and what needed to be done. And so for me, that basically meant to subjecting myself to an hour and a half of cardio aerobic oriented torture on a daily basis. And because that's, that was what I was brought up to believe was the right thing to do.
Now, weren't you a runner?
A long time ago.
Yeah, and your kids are runners.
Kids are runners, distance runners, and I was a runner at one time, but I was always kind of into like the more you spent on a machine, the more hours, more miles, whatever it was, that was how you get healthy or maintain health. And then partly what I missed in the equation, because again, I'm not researching this stuff at this point. I hadn't researched exercise stuff since I was really a freshman in college. And so I haven't done meaningful resistance training in the better part of probably 30 years. So I'd missed out on everything related to the importance of doing strength training. And that's a big part of what we do with the exercise coach. So missed out on that, had my own ingrained belief. So the process then was, for me, was to begin to, once again, I had to not only researching the corporate team at the exercise coach, not only researching the FDD, all that type of stuff. I'm also having to spend a lot of time researching the exercise research that's really taken place over the last 15, 20 years regarding all things that makes us healthier. And it was a process of doing that research, that the 20-minute concept, that 20, 25-minute training concept that we have the exercise coach began to make a lot more sense.
Yeah.
It began to make a ton more sense to us. And so I got over that first skeptical sort of hurdle. And then you go down the path of, the proposition makes sense. It can meaningfully help people. And that became a big deal for us too. Mm-hmm. Getting into it as you're going through researching different franchises, kind of like, if I'm going to spend a lot of money, potentially spend a lot of time, because we're planning being at full-time operators, then it'd be useful if it had a meaningful material impact in a positive way on people's lives. So exercise certainly does that. Huge proponent of that. And this particular concept does it in a very unique way, and it's very powerful. But then get over that hurdle, and then you're into what's the corporate culture like? What's their long-term objectives? Demographics, all these type of things. And so we're attending validation calls, they're called. At the time, the corporate team would host, I think, at least bi-monthly calls to talk about the business, and we're getting more comfortable. And we're talking to the corporate team, and probably at least on a weekly basis. Begin to research the demographics. We happen to live in an area that's demographically attractive, for that type of business, and ultimately we get invited to Discovery Day, and that
fortunately was in Houston.
That was in Houston. This was in September of 2018.
And you already had to be down there. I remember this for one of your kids' track meet or something.
Our son had a cross-country meet in the Woodlands.
Yep.
And so already down there for that. And we get invited to Discovery Day. And then this is pretty funny in hindsight. They basically said, and we'll help pay for your attendance at Discovery Day. I was like, well, that's pretty cool. And that's like a whole different level of engagement by the corporate team. Like, we want you to come and we'll pay for you to be there.
Yeah, not all franchisors do that, by the way.
So it was like, well, that's a good signal. And so we went to Discovery Day. The corporate team put on a very compelling demonstration, a series of presentations, I should say.
And that was your first use of the equipment too, right?
It was.
You had not
and
seen
so
the equipment in person.
At that time, they basically, anybody was, I believe that basically anybody was interested in purchasing one of their franchises. You went through kind of a workout session at one of the Houston studios, and we went through it. And so as I mentioned earlier, I haven't done weightlifting or strength training or resistance training in a meaningful way for decades. I have my own sort of orthopedic issues, shoulders, knees, hips, that type of stuff. And almost inevitably for me, whenever I embarked on any sort of strength training program, I would do for a couple of weeks, whether it's under guidance or doing it myself. and one or many of the joints would start to hurt in a very uncomfortable way, and so I'd quit because I didn't want to quit my cardio. I didn't want strength training to impact my cardio. So,
which was giving you all those joint
which was
problems.
it was a full circle, right? So it's at some point it resonated with me. I don't know when, but then so we go through this training session, and this is not hyperbole. Notice the impact on the muscle system immediately, and very importantly for us, it didn't hurt. And the equipment's really unique. And so in the equipment, the primary strength training equipment in our studios, it's computerized strength training equipment that adapts each client's unique strength profile. That's kind of what we noticed. And that was it. We were pretty much hooked at that point once we went through that first training session.
I think that that's significant about that first experience because it was an exercise system that met his needs.
Yeah.
And I could do it as well.
Yeah.
And so it makes strength training accessible to all people.
Yeah.
I love that. And Andrea and I think the same. I was not really into exercise. I never enjoyed it. I still don't enjoy it. I still complain during 20 minutes, but I always say I can do, 20 minutes. And they know that I'm actually a member at their club and have been for 5 years, almost 5 years since they opened. And I've had some issues when I started. I had a frozen shoulder that a friend of mine had a frozen shoulder and had to have surgery. And through my work at Exercise Coach, my shoulder is completely normal and I didn't have to have surgery. I had a fall last year, broke 2 bones. And I'm 100% confident that because of the strength training that I did at Exercise Coach, I healed a lot faster than I would have. I had core strength, which enabled me to get around, which otherwise would have been really difficult based on my knee being extended full time and my arm being in a cast. So anyhow, I just want to put a plug in for, what I can speak completely from experience myself of the benefits of the program. And, the whole 20-minute thing is kind of hard to fathom, but
it is, and it works. And I actually went to Exercise Coach in Plano for a while when I was I had some shoulder issues after some surgeries that I had, and my husband was trying to get back into working out. But I'm like you, I've got that kind of a background. So I've moved on just because I like doing other things and more things. But it was great to help me come back and get back into exercise again.
I think one thing about exercise is there's something, like you said, Andrea, something for everyone. I mean, some people like, the more intense, the loud music or whatever, kind of environment, the more competitive environment, but that's not for me. And so you have a demographic that isn't comfortable in a traditional gym. And so it really enables those folks to...
And they get guidance.
Yes.
They get, you're competing against yourself.
Right.
You have the support of the trainer. It helps you get over that intimidation you might feel at the gym.
It's very personalized. Mm-hmm. It's a great, it's very individual, and I love the one-on-one attention that you guys provide. I want to also give you kudos to your thought process, because we all do that. We all make assumptions. We all jump to conclusions, and we can so easily shut something down and say, yeah, that's not going to work, because that's not how I've done it for the last 15, 20 years. Yeah. So kudos to you for taking a step back and just saying, I'm going to learn about this and I'm going to understand it before I say no, because a lot of people, even though they say they can be open-minded, they can't. And it's so important in this process, because you really owe it to yourself, because you could have said no to an amazing opportunity based on all of your beliefs, which we refer to as head trash, by the way, because we have it too. Yeah. But kudos to you for that, because look how well it worked out. And you could have easily just walked away and said, that doesn't work.
Right.
And you guys, at that point, when you decided that this was the right fit, decided that you kind of wanted to get the market where you live, which is South Lake, and then you ended up doing Colleyville and Coppell based on the opportunities that were available, because somebody else was had Keller, and then there ended up being a change. So that's how you ended up getting South Lake, Keller, and Colleyville, which are all neighboring communities. People can, one nice thing about that is I know that you share your staff can rotate among those locations. locations.
Awesome.
And so a lot of franchises, don't necessarily require that you have contiguous territory, but I think it's really smart that y'all are able to do that.
It was a strategically, I think initially we were thinking only doing one studio, and then as we got a little bit deeper into the process and began to find, better appreciate what the business could deliver, that's when we decided to go to being a multi-unit operator. And strategically, we were looking at Northeast Tarrant County, so basically 3 communities, Colleyville, Keller, and South Lake. And the thought process being that if we had those sort of 3 communities, it's kind of the 3 different 3 studios kind of lift each other up. Each of our studios happens to be no more than about 15 minutes away from our house, which is entirely helpful.
Yeah.
And as you already mentioned, our trainers can rotate between the studios quite easily.
Yeah.
And that's very helpful.
Yeah. So that all worked out.
And your studios are all very different, right? The type of locations they are very different.
They are. Yeah. So it was we have the South Lake location, standalone building in the very northeast part of South Lake. It's a 2-story building. It's the only retail thing in that area, surrounded by residential houses. A long story in terms of how the building got created and why it got zoned the way it did and everything. So, but it's a newer building, and we don't require visibility. So we don't need visibility. We don't in any way rely on visibility in terms of bringing potential clients into the studio, and that's also been awesome because there's virtually none in the South Lake store. We got a monument sign out front; you can barely see. And then the Colleyville studio, kind of likewise. Colleyville is a little bit where we're located in the Colleyville is a little bit more retail oriented than what's in the South Lake studio. But it's still, there's not like there's a ton of foot traffic and people walking by and all that type of stuff. So that's different.
Yeah. And it also has residential on the 3rd floor.
It does?
Yeah,
Okay.
multi-use building. So it's a little bit different for a suburb.
And then the Keller's a location is kind of in a traditional strip mall with a lot of visibility, high degree of foot traffic, and so entirely different locations. Ultimately, for us, one of the things that's been very gratifying about the business, and it's been has been the fact, again, we just don't need visibility. We don't. We obviously advertise heavily on social media. But we didn't have to, we don't need big signs out front or anything type of thing to bring clients into the studio.
Who is your client? Who's your demographic? Who loves the exercise coach?
Everybody loves the exercise coach. Okay. So the primary demographic, I would say, it's 45 plus years in age. Mm-hmm. It's individuals. It is a wide range in terms of intent. We have many clients who do not particularly like to exercise, so like to get the maximum dose of it in a short period of time.
And Roxanne's looking at me.
We have triathletes that train in our studios. We have former collegiate athletes that train in our studios. So we have individuals that can't stand exercise. We have individuals that love to exercise. It's a wide range. Age-wise, though, call it about 45 plus years in age.
But we've worked with people as young as 15 and as old as 86.
Oh, as old as 91.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
Giving people their mobility back.
Wide range. Yeah. We've had potential clients walk into one of our studios and they're in their 70s, and for the first time ever, their primary doctor said, "What are you doing for strength training?"
Wow.
And they've never moved a resistance their entire life. And so what do you do?
Right.
Your doctor says, you need to start doing this. You have a fall risk or whatever it is. And so, and you're like, if you don't come from that background or anything, like, what am I supposed to do now? Right. And so and we've had, and we've got that type of client. And again, we have clients who have done an extensive amount of resistance training almost their entire life by virtue of sports they've been playing and stuff like that. So it fits everybody. But age-wise, generally 45 plus years in age. The
women tend to come first, and then their husbands follow a couple months later.
Interesting.
That is interesting because we like the quicker workout.
We think it's partly a function of a lot of our social media advertising takes place on Facebook, and therefore we think that generally that's going to be seen first by women before men see it, possibly. But what ends up happening, the husbands come in later because the wives keep talking about how great it is, and
Well, as we age, we're all learning how important it is because we lose so much muscle mass as we age. So it's important to stay strong and not break bones and helps with bone density, right?
Yes.
But I also think it's a great way to cross train. Like if you're somebody that does all that cardio and you're not cross training, that's how you get injured. So
yeah, we have that, and so we've had potential clients and they're inquiring because they run marathons, and they do something else that's pretty extensive and cardio oriented, but not strength contributing. And so they and somewhere in there again you begin to identify through either someone identifying for you or certain functional movements that you're no longer as comfortable doing as what you were doing in the past, that strength training needs to be part of the equation. But you don't want to, in this particular case of these folks, it's still not your primary interest, but you know how important it is and how it contributes to these other activities that are more important to you, but you got to do them. And so what you then sort of lean to once again is get the maximum dose you can do in the most optimum time period.
Well, and for me, having an appointment is key.
Yes.
Because I don't have the self-discipline to do it on my own. So you guys opened in 2019 and then good old COVID. And you shared that gave you an opportunity to kind of regroup and figure some things out. And here you are. Now you've opened your second and your third locations and all seems to be going well. You have a great staff. So if somebody's thinking, wow, I would like to take a step like this and maybe consider owning my own business, you guys are not different than a lot of our clients who really had not thought about it before and really don't know how to get started. Do you have a tip or some advice that you might want to share with somebody that might be thinking they would like to explore owning their own business?
I think tip number one, probably what we already talked about. I would look at multiple different business opportunities so you get a basis for comparison.
Yeah.
Particularly if you're new to if owning a franchise or a small business or whatever it is something you haven't spent an extensive amount of time on, you have no basis for comparison between the differences. So interview multiple concepts. And even if something jumps off the page immediately, say that's it, still look at multiple concepts. And so you have a better comparison point. And then, and the rest of the stuff's kind of rudimentary. I mean, the FDDs are just, they're a grind to,
yes, they are.
to
Nobody has ever said they enjoy reading an FDD, just so you know. Maybe an attorney.
But it's
there
can be very useful information in there. And so the FDDs go through that, interview the corporate team, have a sense for the corporate history. That's if the founder's still involved, why'd they start the business? And you try to get it, in different ways, try to get a sense for what is their ultimate objective with what they're trying to do. And so that would be, maybe top couple of tips to think about there.
I can't emphasize enough that piece of it that you just shared, because it needs to be a culture fit, and we kind of compare it to a marriage, and you're signing a 10-year agreement with this company, and it needs to be somebody that you trust and have confidence in and would enjoy working with over that time.
It's a fact. I mean, you don't really appreciate it enough until you start the process. So and what I'm talking about is interviewing the corporate team, getting a sense for what the culture is. How long, so your corporate staff, how long have they been there? Are they actually involved in the business themselves? That was a big deal for us too. So the corporate team, at least at the time, everybody was on the corporate team, with the exception of one person, possibly. They owned at least one studio. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, so they're invested in the business in an entirely different way.
Yeah.
It's not just a salary.
Yeah.
And so corporate culture was a big deal for us. What's a long-term objective? Are they forward thinking? I mean, what's they remember at Discovery Day, they're not only were they talking about here's why we think the current business will be successful for you. Here's what else we're working on. And so it's, what else what other things are in the pipeline? And for us, those are clear signals of things that the corporate team is undertaking to preserve the value of our business. We're not just getting your money up front and go run it and away you go. Yeah. Here's how we're going to do. Here's other ideas. Not all of them are going to stick necessarily, but here's other things that think that may be incrementally helpful for the business. And so we're thinking about it. And you learn this stuff through talking to the corporate team.
Staying relevant, up with technology.
Yes. Yeah. And what's the infrastructure? And this would be another tip. Pay a lot of attention to the infrastructure that the corporate team has put in place in order to support the business, the marketing elements, the pipeline software. I mean, how well thought out has this whole process been? Mm-hmm. So what all have they taken place of that helps ensure that we as a business owner can focus on the business?
The business,
yes.
Thank you for sharing.
And that's my sense is, based upon a couple of interviews I did with some of the other franchise concepts, sometimes that stuff's taken for granted, or it's a passing thought. It's kind of like, it's something you'll figure it out.
Not all franchises are the same. How many times have we said that? So don't assume, do your research.
Yep.
So if somebody wanted to learn more about the Exercise Coach, Southlake, Keller, and Colleyville, how would they get a hold of y'all?
They just go to the website, exercisecoach.com.
Perfect. And put in location and find you guys. And one other thing I just want to elaborate on was Andrea's support of Mike through this whole process that we didn't really touch on. But Andrea had a side business in addition to her mom duties. And then when Mike decided to make this investment and move forward with Exercise Coach, she got a job at the school, got insurance, and helped him get up and running. And then now is 100% stepped away from the school job and working together.
Yeah.
So important. That's spousal support is so important. Yeah. You cannot do this without that. So
we have to do this as a team, and we divide and conquer, and it actually works out kind of natural for us. What I like to do is not what he wants to do, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So
that's a beautiful thing. You're not stepping on each other's toes.
It is. It's perfect.
No issues with that.
Well, thank you for joining us today. For those of you listening, thank you. We appreciate you tuning in. Please follow Sarah and I on LinkedIn. We're very active there. I'm Roxanne Rapske, Rapske. Sarah with no H, Waskow, Waskow. You can also learn more at frannet.com. Our YouTube channel is Frannet of Dallas, Fort Worth, and Oklahoma. And you can find Unpredicted Entrepreneur on any of the podcasting platforms. So thank you and goodbye.
Bye.